Hello, I'm Robert, fact-checking, helping you if you're scared of many things. I'm going through the essence of Putin's victory speech, today's speech today, and there's no major announcements. And he left the door open for a peace treaty. He hasn't tried to annex any of Ukraine, which was kind of a red line for Zelensky for a peace treaty. And Russia's sure to lose soon. That's obviously not something that he said, but that is pretty clear from the situation. So, so that's it. Didn't care any new republics. That's basically. Then this is Philip O'Brien, that he's a professor of military strategy, and he says there that ignore the rhetoric. He didn't declare war. He didn't do a general mobilization, and that's what's important. And so Russia can't fight a long war, and the clock starts ticking on the failure of their army in Ukraine. So Russia is already losing. It's losing large areas around Kharkiv. It's probably on the point of losing Izium, which is a fortress in the center of Donbass, very important. And it's not managed to capture Mariupol. There are 2,000 fighters in the steelworks. There are 2,000 fighters left in charge of Mariupol. The only difference is the fighters in the steelworks don't have much by way of weapons left, of artillery and so on. So he's withdrawn just about all his soldiers from Mariupol. So the main section of the speech, he says addressing the armed forces and the Donbass militia, and he just says they're fighting for Russia, and don't forget the lessons of World War II. He says that there's a moment of silence and memory, and the main thing is that he doesn't mention, of course, the deaths of the Ukrainian civilians, because Russians are not aware of that Russia is killing civilians in Ukraine. He signs this presidential decree that I mentioned about support for children of wounded soldiers and killed soldiers. He wishes the wounded soldiers a recovery, talks to us. It's all fairly normal stuff. Saying the soldiers from around Russia, and saying they tried that the Russia's enemies have tried to split up the Russian Federation, which is not true. And then different nationalities fight together. He says that the winners will always look up to those who crushed Nazism in the Great Patriotic War of World War II. That's the end of the section where he talks about Donbass and talks about Ukraine. But he talks about Donbass, he doesn't mention Ukraine there. He talks more, he says the fight in Donbass. And then his rhetorical introduction, there's nothing new, it's very much the same we've heard over and over again. They're fighting for security of Russia, which of course is not true. They called in the West for dialogue and they wouldn't listen, but that's not true at all. There was in the middle of dialogue, there was lots of intensive dialogue going on when they started the war. That NATO openly prepared to attack Donbass and Crimea, that's not true. That NATO was supplying advanced weapons to Ukraine, defensive weapons, because they had good intelligence that Russia was about to invade. There's never going to give up love for motherland, nobody's asking to do that, and it's inevitable that Russia would collapse with neo-Nazis. There aren't any neo-Nazis, there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine and neo-Nazis in most countries, but it's a small minority. There's only one far-right MP in Ukrainian parliament, and the Ukrainian government is, the president they elected is a Jew, and you don't elect a Jew to lead a neo-Nazi government. And so he's also Russian speaking as his first language, so he's not anti-Russian either. That's why he got such a good, big, strong vote from the Russian ethnic community as well. 73% is quite a lot. I think it was 73%, but that had to include a lot of Russian speakers. And then he makes, further down here, his only mention of a world war. He says that they're proud of those who crushed Nazism in World War II, and he said that they're fighting, they need to be vigilant so that the horrible global war does not happen again. He doesn't actually say that they're fighting global war. And then it's leaved, they have no possibility of escalation. Russia has committed 65% of their armed forces to attack Ukraine. They have lost a third of them in the first 2 months. They've lost more since then. If they go on for another 2 months, they're losing at the same rate. I mean, that's not all killed, but killed and out of And so if they continue at this rate, they only have a third of what they had before the war started available, and it's a much higher proportion of the more experienced. They've lost half their generals, and roughly some say a bit under, some say a bit over half, and they have lost very high numbers of their best fighters. So it's going to be years for them to recover, and if they continue for another 2 months, they'll lose most of the remaining generals, and they'll lose most of their experienced fighters, and they'll have all they have left are some conscripts and a few generals the ones who survived to try to train them. So then we'll have the sooner they stop in terms of Russian strength, the better, because it's not just for this war, but for the future. Russia's going to take ages to recover from this, and they've actually lost a significant part from all their main regiments and brigades that have been sent to Ukraine. So they claim that Kiev announced the might. That's not true. And they actually complied with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So just said a whole lot of standard false things, as they always say. So the situation is that if Putin had good understanding of what's happening on the front line, then he would be suing for peace right away. Indeed, if he had very good information from the front line and what's really happening, he'd have sued for peace when they were half encircling Kiev, because that was when Russia was at their very highest point in the war. They're never going to reach that level of controlled territory again. And indeed, if he had been fully informed, he wouldn't have invaded. So that makes the situation equal. He could have had a much better treaty at the end of it if he hadn't invaded. So anyway, he's now going to so it's just really a question of how long it continues. The clock is ticking, and it's really Russia. If it was sensible, the sooner the better they stop, as far as Russia is concerned. So that's basically the situation, and so I'm going to do another separate video about what the peace treaty might be like. There's no way he's going to escalate, and the more this continues, the less possibility there is for Russia to engage in any other future large wars like this. They couldn't do this war again. If even now, if they were to do the peace treaty now, they couldn't start this war again, because they don't have the soldiers that they had at the beginning of this war. They couldn't rerun it, because they'd have far less soldiers. They wouldn't have been able to do all the things they did do if they were to rerun the war starting now. So the longer this continues, the weaker they are, the less risk there is for any other country. And there's absolutely no possibility they're going to attack Finland or Sweden. That would be absolutely bonkers. And there's never been, I've never throughout this, because based on the facts, it's been absolutely obvious there's been no increase in risk of a nuclear war. That's just clickbait. NATO has said all along that they see no reason to escalate their alert level. They've just been misreported. But they've said that all along. They've never said that there was an increased risk. I don't think they've said even right at the beginning that there was an increased risk. It's certainly not their message for the last few weeks. And the NATO do not see any deployment of tactical nukes or possible use of tactical nukes in Ukraine. So that would be even Russia using small-scale nukes in Ukraine, more like a very large conventional weapons in size. They haven't sent them. They're still in storage, basically. They haven't unpacked them and sent them. So that NATO don't see any sign that they've unpacked their tactical nukes and that they're planning to use them. So, and that's their latest intelligence. So there's nothing here to be scared of. It's not going to be a big war. It's impossible. They can't even escalate inside Ukraine. And it's really a question of how long it is before Russia sues for peace, and what's in the peace treaty. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I talked in the longer videos about the importance of relating to kindness and not to foster hatred. It helps your mind. I won't talk about this because I want to keep this very short. And then so I've got a separate article about that, and and all the things about advice on how to like therapist help, and if you're anxious, if you're scared, and if you have if you're mental disorders as well, and if you're depressed as well, and think about it like physical health. So you go to the doctor, you're physically ill, but you still do things to maintain your physical health. So you, even if you're in good physical health, you can improve your physical health. Most people do things to try and be more healthy. So it's the same with mental health. And try to do things, especially if you've been adversely affected by the Ukraine war, and then there are many things you can do and relating to kindness in your mind is a quite easy thing to do, which can be added on to all and not fostering hatred, and that's good for your mental health. And I'm just talking about that experientially, and that's advice from many religions. They advise that they say this is the path of their religion, is the path of kindness and loving kindness and gentleness and peace, of kindness in your mind. Doesn't mean doesn't mean you can't be fierce. Doesn't mean you can't take strong action, but trying to develop kindness in your mind. And then there's various tips and supporting someone who's suicidal, because sadly some people have been suicidal over the Ukraine war, and all these. So I've got links to tips at the end here. And okay, so that's my short video. I don't know if I managed to do an even shorter one. That's the shortest I've got this so far. So I'm just going to stop and upload, and hopefully this helps someone.